Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted and privileged to welcome a very, very accomplished professional from Minnesota, USA, Sandy Hansen-Wolff. Sandy, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Ash. I am thrilled and honored to be here.
Thank you. Sandy is an intuitive strategist, a speaker, and a trainer to leaders and visionaries. So, Sandy, before we talk about intuition and strategy, tell me a little bit about your own amazing journey in brief.
All right. Well, yes, the Cliff Notes version. As a child, I would say I would think all leaders feel this way, that we were always a little bit different. We felt different, or where do we belong, that type of thing. And so as an adult, that's kind of played out, and I've started to honor that. And how I became, a coach and trainer and speaker and facilitator and intuitive strategist really started about 25 years ago when I met my first husband. And a few months later, he was diagnosed with leukemia. And to honor the story and also to keep it short, he passed away from complications of cancer in 2003. Only about 15 months after we were married. And I assumed the duties of his agribusiness company, which I was not involved and had no previous experience. So took the company over blindly and thought it was the biggest curse. However, not only am I 30 years old and grieving my late husband, also needing to lead his company that we had just bought out from a partner, so had brand new debt and all of that. So to say it was seemingly insurmountable is an understatement. Right. However, it also gave me conviction and passion for helping other leaders through times of how do I scale and do it more successfully and quicker, and became my platform of how I learned the hard way and developed my shortcuts of how I do strategy and work now.
What an amazing story. Thank you for sharing it. So, Sandy, let's talk about intuition and strategy. How do you define intuitive strategist?
Yes, good question. So this came to me when I was sitting in my own boardrooms of, hiring very accomplished strategists to develop our own strategies and goals for the next quarter or year and so on. And realizing, sitting in my own board meeting, that there was a huge gap because we were agreeing logically to goals. And yet, I did not voice this, but something felt off. Like, I just don't think that feels right. So it was a difference between logical thought and feeling. And so I developed a method of using strategy, of how we've, learned it in our programming, and then really honoring, wow, what's that nudge we're feeling? And if you could intersect the two, what would happen? So that's how, it's still the mainstream way of doing strategy, but combining a more sensory experience of honoring what we're really sensing too.
And what would you say are some of the misconceptions people may have about combining intuition and strategy?
Well, I think when we talk about intuition, people go into, well, that's woo. That's not proven. That's, basically bunk. That just isn't going to work. We need logical, brain-based goals and so on. And my rebuttal on that is that intuition, or some of our sensory things, are very much proven in a scientific method. We just have not learned how to use them. And so that's the biggest misconception of we just need to learn to that gap and combine it with what we already know. And that's where the real magic happens.
Well said. And how do you train leaders and visionaries to tap into and trust their intuition?
So, Ash, it's really experimental, and through exercises. All of us have been in conferences and in strategic planning meetings where we just kind of get bored and we're listening a lot, we're not contributing. So I take them through a series of visualizations and more of an incorporated, all-inclusive experience where they're going through their own experimentation and showing them methods of how to start trusting themselves and their thought process and their gut instinct.
Very interesting. But at the same time, you know, on the one side, intuition is gut instinct, and strategy is something that you sit down with numbers and data. So how do you balance data-driven decision-making with intuitive insights?
Yes, I think it's a happy marriage.
Okay.
I think it's a yes and. So I do think we need logical, brain-based data. And then I think, you know, like the concept of, well, you're out of your mind. What that came from is like, well, you're just using your head. You know, you're not considering, well, does this match our, you know, how we're feeling about it? Can we sense it? Can we see it? And so when we take the data and then we incorporate a checkpoint of, does this feel right to us? You know, can we see this vision? Because if you can't feel it and you can't see it, it doesn't matter if you can think it all day long. So it's definitely, it's a combination.
Wonderful.
And I believe that's where the magic intersection is.
I agree completely. But for my viewers and listeners, could you give me an example of you know, some leaders you may have worked with, or, you know, some organizations, on how you combined intuition and strategy?
Okay, sure. And so how I do my sessions is I call it the infinity loop method, and it's looping, you know, like it's that figure eight loop of continuous flow. And so, for example, we'll take the literal challenges at hand and look at the data on it, and we'll honor that. And the difference is, what we'll do with that is we'll say, okay, we're laying it on the table and we're not going to solve toward the past. It's kind of like, okay, this is the data. And now an example is working with a team of X marks the spot on today. We talked about the challenges, and then we move into the almost like a utopian vision exercise of where do we want to be in 2 years, and not considering, you know, we laid out the challenges, we've got it on paper, not considering the challenges, but really considering what we could envision if no challenges were present. And out of that flows the third aspect. So it's, you know, spell out the challenges, do the visioning as if there were no challenges, and then come back and circle around to making the tie of, all right, so now what are the top aligned goals? And some of the goals that people, or actually I've seen it every time to the point of goosebumps, is the goals that people come out of and teams come out of with this are completely aligned, both in thought and in considering the challenges and considering that their vision and how they feel about it matches the goals.
Great response. Thank you. My next question is, how does emotional intelligence tie into intuitive strategy?
I think it's a lot like the data component. I think it's hand in hand. It's incorporating it. You know, if we say one or the other, and I think that's the challenge or the mismatch maybe in strategy, is that we think it has to be one lane.
Right.
And so I'm all about connection. And if we don't have emotional intelligence, you know, it's going to be really hard for our business to succeed.
Correct.
And so I think it's incorporating all of that into emotionally intelligent decisions that also incorporate logical brain-based thinking and the intuitive nudges that we're getting.
Well said. Sandy, you're also a trainer to leaders. What are the top 3 qualities you believe every visionary leader should cultivate?
Yes. So number one, I think it's thinking with that connection and alignment in mind. And I think that's getting taught more and more in our schools, in our executive education and so on. And there's a lot coming out now with like that heart-based leadership. And so it's thinking with our head, with our heart, with our gut instinct. And what does that look like? the second component, I think, is to rethink, like have a rethink everything muscle, where there's so many habits and things that we do every day that get us into overwhelm and exhaustion. When we really step back for a second and say, did I really need to do that? Or do we need to continue this path? Do we need to have this meeting all the time? So there's definitely new paradigms that we can adapt and put into place quickly. I'm all about quantum leaping everything. Like there's a lot of skip steps we can do here, and start implementing and really transcend some of these old habits, and even like the overwhelm, exhaustion, the anxiety, the complete mismatches of how we're feeling as a culture within our company. The third is, I really do believe in, like, I don't get real spiritual in my practice because I'm in business world, but really those heart and soul based concepts where they do match on more of a visceral level. So the release from like that overwhelm and exhaustion that comes from just those brain and logical goals, that's like, gosh, that's not gonna, I just don't see it. I don't see it working. And so it's really that renewal of our mindsets that's the key.
Well said.
And more of a holistic approach.
Fantastic. And just to repeat for my audience, the top 3 qualities that Sandy has just given us. One is renewal of your mindset. Second, I love the term, have a rethink muscle. And the third one was think with connection and alignment. Thank you, Sandy. That was a great 3 points. So moving on, in an era dominated by artificial intelligence and data analytics, where do you see the role of human intuition in business evolving?
Yes, great question. And I think that's one that a lot of leaders are grappling with now. Number one, we're human. So I think there will always be that human sensory component. I love AI. I'm excited to see where it will go. There's challenges with that. And I would say that any new technology or AI or like we talked about data and emotional intelligence, it's all a part of the matrix, and that's where the connection comes in, instead of let's put that over there in that camp and we're doing this over here, which is what I feel was the gaps all along and the strategies that we had incorporated long ago. And so to me, it's like, honor it, explore it, bring it in, and do a gut instinct. Like, they can be like, our humanness is kind of a good stopgate of, does this feel right? Can I see it? It always goes back to that intersection.
Very interesting. My next question is, how do cultural differences impact? And you live in a country which is probably one of the most culturally diverse countries in the world. How do cultural differences impact the way people perceive and use intuition in business and leadership?
I think that's a really interesting question. And how I've seen this play out, Ash, is really, it's kind of the human call right now is, I want to be seen, heard, understood, and appreciated for who I am and my cultural upbringing. So I think that plays in of like, there's a call to meet people where they're at instead of forcing something on someone. So, I feel like intuition might have different names, gut instinct. Some people might call it spirit, soul, doesn't matter. So to me, I always go into a team or a culture, or even the individual coaching I do, of like understanding what their values and their culture would bring to it. And so I think it presents differently, but not ever in a way that's a detractor. It's how does this play out in your culture, and then how do we incorporate it from there? This is kind of a universal theme that I think is it's a good cross section of it. Kind of works everywhere.
Absolutely.
And it works in personal life too, obviously.
Well said. So Sandy, my next few questions will be using your avatar as a coach and a trainer, uh, given your own amazing background, my question to you is, how has your background supported your coaching philosophy, your style, and your values?
Mhm. I love this question, and obviously everyone's going to answer it for themselves, but it's a good reflecting point.
Yeah.
First of all, having lost my first spouse at the age of 30,
Yeah.
and these are obviously my opinions, and our slant on things. I really feel like trauma cracks us open. And I'm grateful for that. It gives us a new awareness and a new awakening to things we have never considered before when we're sitting in that dark night of the soul. And universally, actually, I think now we're all being kind of cracked open because of a lot of change that we're not really honoring the transitions and the impact of those transitions in our lives that we've had even in the last 2 years. So I think being in a state where we were almost bankrupt at the beginning of my journey in entrepreneurship because of the new debt load we had. And that really caused me to get, even the out of the box, it was like to get universally odd about how I thought about how we could solve problems with zero resources. And so it's kind of that adage, when you have nothing to lose, you'll try a lot.
Correct.
But the other thing is, like, I think the hard work mentality and some of those basic principles still play. Some of the values they're constant.
Yeah, well said. The other question that I had was that, most of us have people in our lives who influence us, or people who we look up to. So my question is, how have you been shaped by people in your life, and how have they influenced you as a coach?
Yes, well, thank you. So I have been a fan and a learner in the metaphysics and different spiritualities throughout the world, different customs, different cultures for 30 years. And so some of the people that I look up to are not necessarily business gurus, or those that are maybe living now.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of ancient wisdom that, from books and just looking back on I would say my best teachers are the pioneering leaders and even spiritual or, human gurus of the world from ancient times.
Yeah.
And when you start studying that, they've had the answers all along that would bring joy and ease and happiness. And so it really is a study of simplicity and connection.
Great response. Thank you. My next question is that, given your background, given all the people who you've spoken about, who you have looked up to, what are some of the unique perspectives you bring into each of your coaching relationships?
So, Ash, I feel like, sometimes this is we have to watch the stories we tell ourselves. And, my first husband died when I was 30. And I feel like I played that almost victim story for a while, and when you realize you're always empowered, your story changes a little bit. And we're always at choice. That said, I would say some of my colleagues and people in my circle, when I took over an agribusiness company, were very, very hard on me, and in ways that I would consider fairly nasty, and I would say some of those beat downs, for the lack of a better way to say it, whether, maybe some of it's fabricated, a lot of it was real, where I was not invited to the table and so on as a woman. And that made my level of resilience really, really a strong muscle again. So I'm grateful for that now, although it didn't feel comfortable at the time. The other thing is, I had to find ways to quantum leap to success
Mhm.
without a lot of resources. And so I feel that, what I bring to coaching and consulting is, our story of this has to be hard and we have to burn the midnight oil. I don't
Right.
think it's true at all.
Mm.
I think if we can kind of elevate to a new mindset and way of looking at everything and really go into this space of how does this all align, the success comes a lot quicker and with a lot of ease and with a lot more alignment for ourselves, but within our culture and our teams. And so I am so convicted on that I tell prospects, my style is quick. You don't have to hire me for 6 months to try to get results.
Right.
I like to really quantum leap, but that will take us thinking differently and doing this differently and visualizing and maybe doing some of these exercises that you've not done in business before. So it's my style. I'm unapologetic for it because I've seen how it works.
Absolutely.
And we hire for results.
Correct.
So
Absolutely.
it's still about results and data at the end.
Absolutely right. Well said. So, Sandy, you have time for 2 more questions.
Okay.
My next question is about the young leaders, the millennials and the Gen Zs who are now coming into positions of influence in most business organizations. And I've often said millennials and Gen Zs bring in a breath of fresh air into organizations' new leadership styles. Certainly, much better than the boomers generation that I belong to. My question is, what are the areas, in your opinion, these young leaders need to be coached in?
I agree with you, Ash. I think that the younger perspective and the balance that they're seeking in work is something that the generations that have gone before them can really learn from. I feel like the principles of really diving into alternative ways to lead are key right now, because some of these old paradigms and like the world is moving so quick. So how can we use some of these principles that have been around since the beginning of time that we just maybe aren't aware of, using energetic forces, or like it can get as weird as people want, but like incorporating a full matrix of how to make decisions is going to be key to, I think, the younger generations flourishing, because we've got such a changing world that's changing much quicker than when I was 20 years younger.
Amazing. Thank you. And my last question to you, Sandy, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your understanding of intuition and strategy and a coach, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want a lot of our young viewers and listeners to take away?
Yes, perfect way to capture our conversation, Ash. One is do the work of a deep analysis of our stories and mindsets that keep us stuck and like in this continuous loop of chaos and our stories of overwhelm, exhaustion, and a lot of the challenges of society now. What's at the root of all of this? What's at the root of my angst? What's at the root of my food addiction? Whatever, pick it, and creating a new loop that has proven quick transformation. And I really think it's possible. And it can be instant. So that's number 1. 2 is adapting to these new paradigms of thought and doing mindset shifting work to create ease and relief, and really thinking about if what I would call quantum leap, which means like we're skipping steps. If quantum leap results and breakthroughs were possible, what would that look like? And how would that feel? And what could that do for my company and for my personal life? And number 3 is it's imperative to adapt the connections of everything we've talked about. So it's not, one thing has never been and never will be the answer. Going just to AI or going, just to emotional intelligence. These are all tools, and adapting the connection of all of these tools with intuition, with that heart and soul and passion of what we're doing, in all of our business and life is the key to elevate us beyond that burnout and that feeling of being stuck and lost. And I really, really believe it's possible because I've done it as my own self-experimentation through my years.
Right.
And I've also seen it with many teams and many private clients. And it's mind-blowing.
Amazing. Amazing. Sandy, on that note and your 3 amazing lessons, look at a deep analysis when we are stuck, get to the root. Second, you said was adapt to the new paradigms of thought. And the third one, which was so amazing and so powerful, is adapt all the connections. Don't rely on any one or two, because there will be magic that may happen between the multiplicity of thoughts that you may have, and have the ability to adapt to all of them. Thank you, Sandy, for telling me about your own story. Thank you for sharing your own story. Thank you for talking to me about intuition, about strategy. You know, when I first read about you, somehow intuition and strategy seem to be at 2 ends of one spectrum, but you have brought it all together so beautifully as an intuitive strategist. Thank you also for speaking to me about some aspects of coaching and what you bring as a coach. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to participate, Ash. My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website, www.tbcy.in, to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.